Greetings, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Introduction and Orientation to Mindfulness and the Mindfulness Challenge at UBC. I'm going to give people about 1 more minute to get logged in. We had a lot of people sign up for this webinar, so I'm sure people are just tuning in and clicking the link now. If you're seeing the opening slide, Mindfulness Challenge for UBC, seeing me, hearing me, then we're all in the right spot. And we'll get started in just a moment or so. Good opportunity to close out any other windows. If you're just coming from another task, take this opportunity to make it a mindfulness practice of being able to focus just on what we're doing here today. Our intention today is to give you a good introduction to mindfulness, perhaps if you're new to mindfulness, and an orientation to the 30-day mindfulness challenge, which is an online training being made available to UBC employees, both staff and faculty. My name's Dr. Jeff Soloway. I'm the founder and chief training officer at MindWell-U. I'm delighted to be presenting to you today. I've been working with UBC over the past 4 years in helping to bring mindfulness to the community, and just delighted that we've continued to evolve our offerings and get so much support from human resources, as well as lots of people signing up for our trainings and programs. So delighted to be continuing to offer our training. So here we go. I wonder if it seems obscure to you that we're having a learning, or there's training in mindfulness being offered through the workplace. And if it does seem a little bit obscure, I'd like to propose that there's been a lot of things in time, over the time of history, that have at one point started as obscure, but then become obvious. For example, in the early 1900s, if you had this item that you put in your mouth to brush off your teeth, clean your teeth, this was an absolutely odd type of activity to participate in. But as we've continued to incorporate this into our daily life, we come to know this as brushing our teeth, and we don't think about it. Most of us don't think about it, I would argue, and we most commonly do it at least twice a day. So it's become a very obvious type of practice. Seatbelts. Before the 1960s, putting on these types of putting on these belts around our body when we were in our car was pretty obscure. It was not something that we did, but in today's world, you can't even drive a car really without putting on your seatbelt. The bells are going off in the car, and there's so many reminders that it just becomes such an obvious type of practice that we don't think about it anymore. It's just a natural thing that we do. We put on our seatbelt. In the 1970s, if we were to see somebody jogging down the street or running down the street, it's likely that we would look behind them and we would wonder who's chasing this person. Now, today, we know that's jogging, that's exercise, and it's a very common activity, and it's good for us. There's a lot of benefits to physical exercise. Again, another example of something that's gone from seemingly obscure to now more obvious. Smoking has definitely gone on this interesting trajectory from obscure to obvious. Think about 20 years ago, 30 years ago, you used to be able to smoke on trains, on planes, in bars. Now you can't even get within 9 meters or 3 meters of a building without and smoke. So the whole activity around smoking, that type of behavior, has totally changed. At one point, you can be in your office and you would be able to smoke, and now there's no way that you can do that. So things change in how we approach it, and mindfulness is part of this in terms of its evolution. And we've started to see a shift, and I would say around the early 2000s, where we've started to identify mindfulness as a form of mental exercise. We're starting to understand the benefits of this type of a practice for our brain, for our physical health, for our mental health, and then starting to incorporate it into the workplace, the benefits in the workplace as well. What we see today is mindfulness is becoming very mainstream. We start to see a lot of articles in popular magazines. We see it being implemented in a whole host of different arenas, from healthcare to education. If you've got kids in elementary school, then it's likely that they've been introduced to mindfulness. Maybe they're bringing it home for you. And also, we're starting to see mindfulness go into the workplace. And this is just a few samplings of clients that we've been working with over the past couple of years who have been integrating mindfulness into their workplace. And so it's become very kind of a more and more a popular or evidence-based practice that businesses are incorporated into their daily routines, because they know that there's return on that type of practice, both in terms of productivity, in terms of performance, in terms of relationships, reducing stress, health and well-being. There's a lot of different benefits to mindfulness, and I'll start to talk about those a little bit more. You know, interestingly, WestJet has been a client of ours over the past 3 years, making it available to pilots, to leaders, to people in the airplanes, the flight attendants, and they're continuing to evolve in how they make it available. We work a lot with the federal government currently, and we're implementing a really interesting research study this year with a number of different departments within the government, including StatsCan, the Privy Council, Treasury Board. So there's a lot of interest within the government as well. And a lot of this interest is really coming from an evidence-based rise of studies that have been done on mindfulness. And maybe you're familiar with the program called Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction. Dr. John Kabat-Zinn, he was the one who really popularized mindfulness in the West. He developed an 8-week type of training within medicine and healthcare, started working with chronic pain patients. And so this is really at the beginning of the graph. And this graph is illustrating the number of publications done on mindfulness and meditation over the past 30 years. And we see in 2016, we had close to 800 studies done on the area of mindfulness. At UBC alone, there's likely a dozen researchers who I'm friendly with, who are doing studies in the area of mindfulness in different disciplines, from education, psychology, cognitive psychology, philosophy, and social work. There's just so many areas that people are investigating the role that mindfulness plays. And that's really important, because mindfulness, you can start to think about it like a core competency. It's kind of a foundation to a lot of other elements of our human being, and to our brain and to our physiology. So that's why it has such a dramatic impact on so many different parts of our life, because it's really affecting us at a core foundation level. And another reason why it's become so popular and mainstream is because of this research being done on the brain. There's been a lot of studies done on the influence of mindfulness and meditation on mental exercise on the brain, and this notion of neuroplasticity, that the brain will change in response to our daily experience and change in response to training. So when you start to understand mindfulness like mental exercise, then you can start to understand that when you do this mental exercise repeatedly, you're exercising the same pathways, the same circuitry in the brain. And so you're strengthening that circuitry. And when you do that, you start to see structural changes and functional changes in the brain. And so they've done many studies over the past 10 years looking at how the brain changes in structure and in function, looking at different parts of the brain that lights up, like the prefrontal cortex, the frontal part of the brain, the part that is responsible for our executive functioning, It inhibits us from making inappropriate behaviors. It helps us to be more cognitively flexible, enhances our learning and working memory, all really important functions of the brain. And these are areas that it's been shown through the research to be changing in response to this form of mental exercise. They're literally taking like people and putting them before and after training and mindfulness training, putting them into brain scanners and looking at how the brain will change, as well as looking at expert practitioners and looking at the differences in their brain versus people who don't practice. So it's a fascinating area and it's increasing. And so if this is an area that is of interest to you, there's lots of books out there that one could look at and look at the research. So let's do a little activity to start investigating our own mind. And so much of mindfulness is starting to understand our mind. And so I'm going to ask you, no matter where you are, to think of one thing that you can hold in your attention for, we'll say 20 seconds. So just consider one thing that you're going to think about for the next 20 seconds. Just hold that in your mind. So where is your mind now? Is it still on the one thing? Did it wander away, perhaps? Did you have to bring yourself back to refocus on that one thing? So often, if you're human, then you likely notice that it was difficult to stay on the one thing, and the mind wanders. So that's a very important thing to understand when we start to investigate the mind. Some other things you might notice, like, ever picked up a book and got to the bottom of the page and have no idea what you just read? Maybe a report. It happens. Ever found yourself switching from one thing to another task without actually finishing what you were started? Good example might be, ever gone onto the internet to go find an answer to something, and then 5 minutes later you find yourself on a totally different page, right? Ever found yourself in a meeting? How many meetings? Did you have a meeting today? Was there some point where you actually missed what was the topic of conversation in the meeting? Or you're having a conversation with somebody else and you kind of missed what they just said? You weren't actually there, you were thinking about something else? What about even having a hard time getting to sleep at night and considering what's keeping you up? Or waking up early, what's keeping you up at that point? You had that experience. Or maybe it's just a tough time turning off when you're with friends and family at the end of the day. Are you still thinking about work, even when you're at home, and all these thoughts are still happening? So if you've nodded your head or come to an agreement with some of these, then you'll note that this is just part of the human experience, and part of the human experience because it's part of the nature of the mind. And when we start to investigate the mind, we start to see that the mind is very active. It's very, it likes to wander. And so mindfulness, a core aspect of mindfulness is understanding the way our mind works and understanding the tendencies of the mind. Now, we're not trying to fix or make better our minds. We're just trying to understand them a little bit better, because it's this really incredible tool that we have. And we want to know how to utilize that tool in its best form, how to optimize its performance. So that's one really key aspect of mindfulness, is learning more about the mind. Just like if you wanted to learn about birds, then you would likely go outside and you would watch birds. You'd go to the park and a place where all the birds are, and you would watch them. But in order to learn about the birds, you would have to watch them. And you'd have to watch them over time. You might have to come back repeatedly over a number of days. So mindfulness is similar. In order to learn about the mind, we need to watch it and we need to follow it. So that's a lot about what mindfulness is. And all those different examples that I just gave you was really this notion of mindlessness, about how mindless we can be. And they did a study at Harvard In 2010, that was published in the Journal of Science, saying that close to 50% of the time our minds are wandering. Close to 50% of the time. We can't be very effective in our jobs or relationships if we're not really present 50% of the time. Luckily, we have this thing known as autopilot that kicks in when we're driving, so that if our mind is wandering somewhere when we're driving, there's something still paying attention to what we're doing. But maybe it has a lot to do also with why we have so many accidents on the road. So mindlessness is interesting because Ellen Langer says, she's a professor at Harvard. She's been studying mindfulness and mindlessness for over 40 years. She said, when you're not there to know you're not there, and we're not there most of the time. So it's hard to know when we're mindless. It's hard to be aware when we're mindless, because we only become aware when we come back. So what is mindfulness, you might ask? Well, here's one definition. Might be a little bit different from a definition you've heard in the past. Seen clearly in order to respond effectively. Mindfulness is seen clearly in order to respond effectively. What does that mean? Seen clearly. Let's look at this image to give you a better illustration about what I mean by here. So in any given moment, you're able to see what's literally in front of you. Or you could be there in body, but caught up in thoughts that are in your mind. You're not really seeing what's in front of you. You're caught up thinking maybe what's in front of you, or thinking about something that happened in the past. For example, you can be paying attention to me speaking right now, or you could be thinking about the last meeting that you came from, or the task that you were just on. So in any given moment, we have this option or opportunity for mindfulness or mindlessness. And when we're being mindful, we're seeing more clearly what's in front of us. We're not seeing all the interpretations. And that's often where our mind goes. We might see something, but then we like to interpret it. So for example, maybe a coworker said something to you today or in the past, and they said something and it kind of rubbed you the wrong way. You interpreted it to mean something as maybe it was they were saying something about the quality of the job that you just did, or that's how you interpreted it. But to them, that's not what they meant by it. So we place so much labeling and interpretation based on all of our interactions. And so with mindfulness, it's helpful to try and remove that level of perception in order to see more clearly what's actually there, to hear more clearly what's actually being said, because we can be tricked a lot of the time by this level of layering of perception that we bring to our experience. So seeing more clearly in order to respond effectively. When we're seeing clearly, we're also activating these different parts of our brain. We're stepping outside of this automatic pilot and this default mode. When we're mindless, we're actually activating this part of the brain called the default mode network. We're on default. And what we're trying to do is activate different circuitry of the brain so that we can literally access process information that's coming in through our senses in the moment. Mindfulness, it's not what you think. If you're new to the field of mindfulness, maybe you think it's some type of religious practice. Maybe you think you need to shave your head and sit in a cross-legged position to do this type of practice. Again, mindfulness has become a very secularized practice. It's important to note that it does come from a rich history of contemplative practices, which dates back 2,500 years. So there's a long history of people doing these types of exercises. But what's being taught today is much more secularized. You don't have to adopt any certain set of beliefs in order to gain benefit from mindfulness. It's really all about learning how to become more present in your life and how to work with your attention and your attitude in any given moment. It's not about going anywhere special or experiencing anything. Mindfulness is not about blanking your mind. A lot of people think that it's about blanking your mind, and they're not very good at that. Well, mindfulness isn't about blanking your mind. I'm not very good at blanking my mind. It's much more about coming back, if we're trying to practice mindfulness, coming back to the present moment, noticing where our mind wanders and then bringing it back. And then if it wanders, bringing it back. So we become much better at noticing when the mind has wandered and then being able to bring it back. And so if you were at the gym and you keep on going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, you might be doing a bicep curl or a leg press, back and forth. And this is the same thing in mental exercise. When you do this form of repetitive practice of bringing our attention back, we're strengthening that pathway. We're strengthening that muscle of mindfulness. So the 30-day mindfulness challenge is an online, I'm going to move here, is an online training that's being made available to you. And, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this specific training. Maybe you've taken it, maybe somebody in your work, one of your colleagues has taken it. It's scheduled over 30 days. And so you can sign up for an upcoming cohort. And when you sign up, you're able to invite a buddy to take it with you. And you're able to invite a buddy who's either inside the organization or outside the organization. You could invite any person that you want. And this person is probably the most important part for setting yourself up for success, is choosing the right buddy. We included a buddy because we wanted you to be able to participate with somebody on this training. It's kind of like your workout buddy. You're more likely to go to the gym if you have a workout buddy. You're more likely to stay engaged in your mental exercise if you have a workout buddy. So really encourage you to choose a good buddy. And further to that, not necessarily somebody who you think could benefit from this. I would think that trying to choose somebody who's going to be engaged with it, who might be really into this, might be a good choice for your buddy. Somebody who's going to be supportive for you, not necessarily you trying to get them to do it because it's good. It's going to be good for them, if you know what I mean. People often try to invite their spouses because it would be good for them, and they don't make good buddies. So don't fall into that trap. Think about who's actually going to support you. You might see them on a semi-regular instance, or that you can stay connected with. So how it works is you're going to get an email on day one, and every day you're going to get an email and a text message if you provide us with your phone number, and you'll get a daily reminder. And from that daily reminder, you'll be able to click through to the web application. You can access this from your computer, from your tablet, from your phone at any time, and you'll go through content, daily content. And the content is relatively brief. It's about 5 to 10 minutes a day. It includes like a video. There's always a topic for the day, a short video, about 2 minutes long each video. There's a practice called Take 5, which I'll further talk about in a moment, and a reflection that what you're learning about that day, and as well as a message where you can share a message with your buddy. So there's a way for you and your buddy to stay connected on the platform. Take 5, I mentioned, is this core practice that we teach. And Take 5 is what we call mindfulness and action practice. So it's a bit different from going into a quiet, dark room and sitting cross-legged for 20 minutes. This is not a formal meditation practice. It's a little bit different. We're trying to support you in integrating this practice of Take 5 into your daily life. That's the number one goal of the 30-day mindfulness challenge, is to create a sustainable Take 5 practice for yourself. And we want you to customize it. So you're going to have lots of opportunity to practice this, develop this Take 5 practice. And literally Take 5 is about creating this new break in your life, time in versus a time out. It's something that's going to give you a new boost or a refreshed look throughout your day. And it's not actually something where you have to stop what you're doing. You can actually do the Take 5 practice in the midst of what you're doing. You can be in a meeting, for example, and do a Take 5. You can be walking. You can be speaking with a colleague and do a Take 5. So the key steps of Take 5 are noticing our body, noticing our breath, noticing our mindset. And a lot of these steps you'll be definitely introduced to on the mindfulness challenge. The key thing to remember is that we're trying to provide you with the resources to guide yourself through this new practice and customize it for yourself. So at the end, you have this new tool or this habit that you've integrated into your life. And we want you to use it. We want you to make a meaningful practice in your life. So you don't have to adopt anything that doesn't feel right to you. You can customize it to make it a meaningful practice for yourself. Now, we've done quite a bit of research on the 30-day mindfulness challenge in itself. We developed this training because we wanted to reach more people. Reaching people in the workplace is difficult. Often workplaces are spread in a lot of different campuses like UBC. It might be having some people in from the Okanagan today, or the different satellite campuses, all coming together on a Tuesday for multiple weeks in a row is difficult. So that was really the emphasis of building out this practice, as well as we wanted to shift the way it was being taught to make it more accessible for more people. And when we first launched it, the researchers at the Sauder School of Business were a bit skeptical about what type of evidence we would find for its benefit. They were pleasantly surprised to look at the significant increases in resilience, in engagement, emotion regulation, workplace satisfaction, performance, humility, and authenticity, these qualities of leadership, collaboration, workplace vigor, energy, optimism, decrease in disrespect, hurtfulness, rudeness. So a lot of benefits that people were reporting. These were pretty significant studies. The one in 2016 was done across 5 different organizations. UBC was one of them. We had close to 500 people participate in that study. It was a pre and post design and a delayed post. So we had 3 points when we were collecting information and comparing it to a control group. So it was a pretty rigorous design, and with these types of findings. As well, we've had a number of people go through the training already through UBC, and these are the types of stats that we've seen from people who are going through the training. I think we've had over 400, close to 450, I think, people go through the mindfulness challenge at UBC. 94% reported improved ability to handle stress. 85% reported improved communication skills, reporting focused at work. 74 improved time management skills. And when you look at some of these results across all the organizations, I can say that we've run this training now. We've had close to 30,000 people, over 30,000 people go through the challenge. And our statistics are mostly in the 80s into the 90s in these types of stats around ability to handle stress, mental health and well-being, engagement at work, high stats in terms of recommending it to others. So what we've seen is that when people engage with the training, they really find it beneficial and it works. So I really support you in making a commitment to this as a training approach. And you need to do it regularly. You need to be committed to finding the time to do it. It doesn't take a lot of time every day. It's very much of an integrative practice that we're asking people to do. But to find that time when you're going to be able to do it and integrate it into your daily life, because it needs that practice in order to create the benefit. This other notion I just want to introduce is about learning mindfulness in a team setting. Another great way to stay engaged is doing this within a team or a department. So if you're a manager or if you're in a team, you might recommend that why don't we all do the 30-day mindfulness challenge together, and then we can stay engaged together, and maybe we can talk about it on our weekly or bi-weekly meetings. Maybe we watch one of the videos together in our meetings, or we look at one of the reflections from the training, and we can talk about that for 5 minutes in our meetings, or maybe we do a take 5 in our meetings. So you can explore different tools from the training that you can integrate into your team approach. But it's a very strong way to stay engaged, and then also get everybody on the same page around this practice and this literacy of mindfulness, and this practice of Take 5, because it's literally this new competency, this literacy for way of being and way of working together. A couple quotations. In the busy work setting, it's easy to forget about oneself or practicing mindfulness. With a set 30-day challenge, it's a good opportunity with a feasible timeline. All the research supporting the benefits of mindfulness. there's lots of research to support the benefit. And the Take 5, a key concept from the challenge, can indeed make a difference in various scenarios, whether at work or in personal lives. It doesn't require more than a few minutes of your time. So definitely it has benefits that will span both your personal life and your professional life. It works in both because you're human and your mind goes with you wherever you are. So it's gonna transfer. Finally, just supporting you with some key dates, start dates that are coming up. October 29th, we've got a launch of the Mindfulness Challenge. So this would be a great opportunity to sign up, try and sign up maybe some people around you so that you do it together, whether it's your team or maybe a group of friends. Talk to your managers or leaders to see if that's an initiative that you'd like to take on. There's another key launch date in April, and then there will be some additional dates that become available between that time. So there's a great resource on this link, hr.ubc.ca/mindfulness. There's this type of, there will be further links to how to register for the 30-day mindfulness challenge there, as well as a lot of other amazing resources about mindfulness and meditation available to you at UBC. There's also an email there for Melissa. If you have any questions, you can ask. And then when you sign up onto our platform, there's a help desk feature where you can send us questions if you have any questions about signing up or registration or going through the challenge. So it's been a delight to continue to work with UBC on this. Grateful for their continued engagement and support, bringing mindfulness to the community. They're always innovating in what they're doing, and delighted to be offering this again to the UBC community. Thank you for taking this opportunity to watch this webinar. And if you've seen it and maybe this is a good tool to be able to pass around to colleagues or maybe managers, and when you're trying to suggest this type of training to other people. So wish you the best on the challenge to Take 5, and look forward to hearing your feedback. Thanks so much.